Welcome back to my second week of learning how to code. If you haven't seen my first week of coding, I would advise you to check it out. This week I tried to get out of my comfort zone and try to create something huge. And also a massive thank you to all of you who showed your support in any way. It really means a lot to me. Well, I've been editing and coding day and night these past few months and even reconsidered some life choices I've made, but I guess that's the YouTube coding life for you. Anyways, sit back and enjoy the rest of the video. I started my day off by looking at my code and I tried to understand everything I have written. It almost took the entire day since I hadn't really looked at my code since I last coded, and that was about 2 weeks ago. After I started to understand what I had written, I already got stuck on what I should do next. So I just sat there for half an hour or so and tried to brainstorm on what I should do next. And then I remembered that our player doesn't even have a visual health bar. So I went on Google and tried to find some inspiration for health bar. I then created a script for it as well with the help of our old pal at Brackies. Even though there only was a few code lines, I still struggled with the whole coding, and I even forgot to disable the filters and compression on my health bar.
Disgusting!
I did this to every single sprite I had put into my game, so that was how rusty I was. But that was it for day 1. It was now day 2, and I made a tiny list for what I wanted to do for today. I wanted to create some hearts that would randomly drop from the enemies when you kill them, and also wanted to create a power-up for the player. I then started to code the basics of the heart. It wasn't too difficult, I just made a reference to our player script so we can access the function from the player script inside the heart script. So the function inside the player script would add health to our player. And now it was time to make them drop from the enemies. I remembered that I used a random value for the slimes when they jump, and I thought that I maybe could use that inside of an if statement, but I still needed some help from my little robot friend since I didn't know how to write the line properly. So after the help from ChatGPT, I finally understood the random value again. So by using the random value, it would choose a random value from 0 to 1.0. So if we create a drop rate float of 0.25, we can create the if statement, you see it right here. And it will check if the random value landed on a number smaller or equal to the drop rate. If it does, it will run everything inside the if statement, and then it will spawn a heart from the enemy.
Boring!
But it was time to create a power for the player. So I did the exact same thing as I did for the basics of the heart, but instead of the health getting changed, it was now the player's attack damage. Also made it so a little icon would pop up when you pick up the power, so the player would know that the sword will do more damage. Lastly, I then added some animations for the heart and power up, so they would float up and down. I did run into a small bug. That was whenever the player attacked, the attack radius would act as the player's hitbox and pick up the heart or the power up. So when the player killed the enemy, it would instantly pick up the heart. So I just googled around and found out that I can just change how the different colliders interact with each other by using layers. So I just made it so the attack radius collider would ignore the heart layer, and now everything works. That was day 2, but tomorrow was going to be a bit more of an unplanned day. It was now day 3 and I had little to no plan for today. I didn't want to make anything huge since I felt really rusty with coding. So the first thing I did was fixing the ugly ass health bar to make it nice and sharp. I then thought about what was missing for our game, and I then decided to brainstorm for a bit. And my brain squirted out a simple idea of creating health bars for the enemies. Of course I had to search on Google again and found a guy called BMO. I simply just did what he did since it was almost the exact same thing as I did for the player's health bar. The only difference here was the enemy's health bar was floating above themselves and not locked in place like the player's health bar. And you just have to change this to world space. So this is how it looks now. Very simple. I then thought that the heart that dropped from the enemy didn't fit in at all with the art style of our game. So I created a new design for the heart, taking some inspiration from Terraria, and I was very happy about the result actually, so I want to create some more. So I also created a new icon for the power, which was a bit more challenging, since I only want to use my imagination here, but it turned out pretty good. That was it for day 3, but tomorrow was going to be a hella big artistic day. Since yesterday I thought about how much I actually enjoyed the artistic side of creating new things for our game. So I want to make a boss for our game, since right now we only have 2 enemies and no big threat for our player. I already had some sort of idea of how the boss should look like. Since we also have a desert heart set, I thought it was a good idea of creating a sandworm boss. Though I forgot how much shit you actually have to create when making a new character. The boss should have a walk animation both under and above ground, and also attack animations, an animation for when it appears from the ground and also when it's retracting inside the ground again, and lastly a death animation. But there was no time to waste since I really want to be finished with the design today. Firstly, I started to design the whole body for the boss. I had an idea of creating something similar like the sandworm from Mario, aka Pokey, though I soon abandoned that idea and created this instead. It was now time to make some animations. First, I created the animation for when it appears from the ground. I also created the walk animation you see right here. And then I created the attack animation, which was a bit more challenging, since I wanted the sandworm to have a body slam attack, and I wanted it to look powerful and also have weight to it. And me, with little to no artistic experience, didn't know where to even begin here, so I had to make some research before I'm going to wrestle with the animation. I went on Google again and found a guy on Twitter, aka X, called Pedro Medeiros. But our man Pedro here had made so many different guides on how to do pixel art and even animation like motion blur. So I gotta admit here that I used him a lot and I really learned a lot of stuff from him. So if you also want to create pixel art, I would advise you to check him out. Anyways, back to our game. It was now time to create the attack animation, and it was actually not too difficult. I just had to make some long strokes that would replicate motion blur. And I also created so the sandworm will retract after the attacks. And I also wanted it to look fast, so I had to add some more long strokes. Though I forgot to add a death animation, because I'm stupid. But this is how it looks now. And I'm actually very happy about the result, and since this took the whole day, I had no time for setting up the animation inside Unity, so I had to wait for tomorrow. It was now day 5 and I didn't have much time to create anything huge, since I was going to visit my sister who lives a few hours away from where I live. But what I could do was setting up the animations and prepare some parameters for the code. Though I did have to go back and adjust some animations, but that wasn't too big of a deal. So now all the animation is ready for some good old coding, but I had to leave and that was it for day 5. But tomorrow was going to be a very exciting step for our coding journey. Today was going to be a big day, so I had to create a to-do list. First thing was making the sandworm chase the player. Then I wanted to make sure the sandworm would appear from the ground when the player was in range. I also wanted to make sure the sandworm would detect if the player was in a certain range for the body slam attack. And I also wanted to create a new attack for the sandworm. Lastly, I want to make sure the sandworm would change sorting layers whenever the player was above or under the sandworm, to give the illusion of the sandworm being taller than the player. Well, the first thing I did was making sure the sandworm would chase the player, and also creating a detection radar, aka circle collider, that would detect if the player was in range and then appear from the ground when the player was in range. I did this by using the untriggered enter 2D method, and it would check if the player had entered the collider. Then it was time to make it so it would attack the player if it was in a certain range. I did this by calculating the distance from the player to the sandworm by using a vector 2, and then just created some if statements right here. This was actually very easy to do. Since right now the boss was very easy to kill, I thought it needed a new attack. I thought about keeping the player on the move at all times, so I wanted to create some spikes that would appear randomly underneath the player. I did this by adding the random value method like we did for the hearts. The only difference here was making the spike spawn at the player's position, which is calculated right here, and now it works. The last thing I did was changing the sorting layer whenever the player was above or below the sandworm, and that was very easy to do. I created an if statement again that would change the sorting layer of the sandworm right here. I must say I ran into so many different bugs, both in the animation and also in the code itself, because I'm writing spaghetti code all the time. There weren't huge bugs though, but it did take a lot of time to fix them all, and I even had to stop and call it a day because my hair was about to explode, and I knew that I needed a good night rest for tomorrow since there was a lot of bugs and I still hadn't finished the boss yet. So that was it for day 6. It was now the last day of my second week of coding, and here was the plan for today. First thing first was to add some health to the sandworm, since right now it was invincible and impossible to kill. The second thing I wanted to do was to create so the sandworm would teleport away from the player when it had attacked. I also wanted the sandworm to have some invincible frames when it got hurt. This makes it so the player can't spam the attack button and stop him from killing the enemy too quickly. And of course we also need to add a death animation for our sandworm. Lastly, fix as many bugs as possible, which is the most annoying part of coding in my opinion. Let's begin with the day. I started to create some health for the sandworm, and that was straight up just a copy paste from the other enemy's health script. Now the player could kill the enemy but with no clear indication of him hitting the enemy. So I tried coding a hurt effect. I wanted the sandworm to blink red whenever it got hit by the player, and also making sure the player couldn't hit the enemy while the sandworm is blinking red. That was actually very simple to do, other than I had to learn 4 int loops, but it turned out to be quite simple to understand. So I made a loop and I added a line that could change the color of the sprite. So by changing these numbers here, we can choose different colors for our sandworm boss. And now when we turn all the other colors to 0 and turning red to 1, it will now be red. But now we also need to create a death animation for the sandworm, since right now when it has 0 health left, it will just walk around while looking kind of stupid. I had an idea of making so each section of the worm exploded or popped. That was a bit difficult since I had to make some sort of smoke simulation. And you already know my pixel art skills isn't the best, so I had to research a bit and found some reference on the internet. So after boxing with some smoke simulation, I was finally happy about the result. But now came the difficult part. I had to make it so the sandworm would teleport when it was done attacking. The only problem here was I had no clue on how to do this, so I had to write down some ideas. I figured by creating 4 different points in our level, we can make it so the sandworm would teleport to them when it was done attacking. Though I didn't know how to make it teleport to the point furthest away from the player. And I could hear ChatGPT screaming at me, and it gave me a code that I didn't understand, and I still don't really understand the code, but now it works at least. So, when the sandworm attacks, it will retract and then the animation will trigger the teleport function using an event. Then the function will calculate how far the player is away from the points and teleport the sandworm to the one that is furthest away. There was a lot of bugs here, but I don't want to show all of them since there weren't anything major, but it still took me so much time to fix all of them. Overall, the boss fight is pretty good, but we still need to add some more to the sandworm. But my time had run out, so that was it for my second week of learning how to code. And before I let you go, if you have any ideas for a game or even a title for the game, please write them in the comments. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy it and you want to join my coding journey, you can consider subscribing so you don't miss out. Thank you so much again for all the support and love. Cheers.